During a promotion meeting, I said, "I'm excited for my raise." My boss chuckled, "What raise?" "We gave it to Mark." HR showed me the paperwork. I was never even considered. Mark smiled. "Oops, I forgot to tell you." I packed my desk that day. But what happened next left them speechless. I had been dreaming of this moment for months. For years, I had poured my heart and soul into this company, working long hours, skipping vacations, and sacrificing weekends to meet impossible deadlines. I had done everything right, taken on extra responsibilities, solved crises that weren't even mine to handle, and made sure every project under my watch was executed flawlessly. And today, it was all going to pay off. The air in the conference room was thick with anticipation. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the long oak table where my colleagues and I sat. Conversations hummed around me, soft chuckles, hushed speculations, the occasional nervous sip of coffee. Everyone knew what this meeting was about. It was the annual promotion review, the moment when select employees would be rewarded for their hard work with raises and advancements in their careers. I shifted in my seat, my hands clasped together in my lap, feeling a mix of excitement and nervous energy. For the past year, I had exceeded every expectation. I had led our team through some of the toughest projects we had ever faced, picking up the slack whenever someone dropped the ball. I had received glowing performance reviews, and even my boss, Mr. Reynolds, a man known for being stingy with praise, had once told me in passing that my work had not gone unnoticed. I had taken that as a sign. When the email invitation for this meeting arrived in my inbox last week, I had felt a surge of confidence. I had envisioned the moment clearly. My name would be called, my colleagues would applaud, and I would finally step into the position I had earned. I straightened my back and smoothed out my blazer as Mr. Reynolds walked in, his presence immediately silencing the room. He was a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes that had a way of making you feel like he could see right through you. He carried himself with the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating the corporate world, making ruthless decisions without losing a wink of sleep. Behind him, the HR representative, Lisa, followed with a stack of neatly organized folders. She gave me a small, polite nod as she took her seat at the end of the table. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat and adjusted his tie before addressing the room. "All right, everyone, let's get started." A hush fell over the table. As you all know, we've had a challenging but successful year. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work and dedication each of you has put in. Without this team, we wouldn't be where we are today. I bit the inside of my cheek, trying to contain my anticipation. My pulse quickened. And with that, Mr. Reynolds continued, flipping open the folder in front of him. "I'm pleased to announce this year's promotions and salary adjustments." This was it. My fingers curled around the edge of my notepad as he began listing names. One by one, my colleagues were called, some for minor raises, others for more significant promotions. I nodded along, clapping politely for each recipient, my heartbeat accelerating with each passing moment. Then he paused. My breath hitched. "And finally," he said, "we'd like to recognize someone who has made significant contributions to the team this year. Someone who has shown initiative, leadership, and dedication beyond expectations." This was it. This had to be it. I straightened my posture, feeling a smile already tugging at the corners of my lips. "We are excited to announce that this year's promotion goes to Mark." My smile froze. A smattering of applause erupted around me, but the sound faded into the background as my brain struggled to process what I had just heard. Mark? There had to be some mistake. I turned my head slowly, eyes landing on Mark, who sat 2 seats down from me. He was leaning back in his chair with a smug grin, nodding as our co-workers congratulated him. He looked as if he had expected this all along. I blinked. No. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I let out a small, breathless chuckle, trying to mask my confusion. Maybe they were announcing multiple promotions? Maybe mine was next? I forced my voice to stay light as I spoke up. "I'm excited for my raise." Mr. Reynolds turned to me, arching a brow, as if my statement had caught him off guard. Then, to my utter disbelief, he let out a small chuckle and said, "What raise?" "We gave it to Mark." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The room around me suddenly felt stifling. My mouth went dry. I turned to Lisa, hoping for some sort of explanation. She avoided my gaze, flipping through her papers before handing me a copy of the official promotion paperwork. My name wasn't on it. I wasn't even listed as a candidate. My ears started ringing. I looked at Mark, my so-called work friend, the guy who had once asked me to cover for him when he showed up late or forgot an assignment. He grinned and shrugged, his voice dripping with mock innocence. "Oops," he said, "I forgot to tell you." I could barely breathe. My fingers clenched around the edges of the paper as a wave of nausea hit me. The betrayal was so sharp, so sudden, that it left me momentarily paralyzed. I had been played. All my hard work, all the late nights, all the extra effort, it had all been for nothing. No, it had been worse than nothing. It had been for Mark. The Mark who took long lunches and left early. The Mark who spent half his time scrolling through his phone in meetings. The Mark who had once submitted my ideas as his own and laughed it off when I confronted him. A slow, burning rage started to build inside me. This wasn't just an oversight. This wasn't just office politics. This was a betrayal. And it wasn't something I was going to forget. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet their gazes. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the paperwork in front of me, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I had been erased, overlooked, cast aside as if my years of dedication had meant nothing. Lisa, the HR representative, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze darting between me and the document she had given me. She looked like she wanted to say something, but instead, she pressed her lips into a thin line and turned her attention back to Mr. Reynolds, as if hoping I wouldn't make a scene. I forced myself to take a slow breath, steadying the swirling storm inside me. This wasn't the time or place to explode, not yet. But my voice, when I finally spoke, carried an edge I couldn't hide. I wasn't even considered, I asked, looking directly at Mr. Reynolds. He didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed mildly annoyed, as if my question was a waste of his time. It was a competitive process, he said with an indifferent shrug. We had to make some tough decisions. I narrowed my eyes. I'd like to know what made Mark more qualified than me. A few people shifted in their seats. I could feel the tension in the room thickening. Some of my colleagues avoided looking at me, while others watched with interest, as if waiting to see how far I would push this. Mark, ever the smug bastard, leaned back in his chair, folding his arms behind his head. Come on, he said with a chuckle. No hard feelings, right? It's just business. Business. The words slithered through my mind like pea icing. For the past year, Mark had barely pulled his weight. I had been the one fixing his mistakes, covering for his incompetence, and even guiding him through tasks he should have been able to handle on his own. I had assumed, stupidly, that it was all part of being a team. But now I understood. Mark hadn't needed to work hard. He had played a different game. While I was busy proving my worth through results, Mark had been whispering in the right ears, making friends with the right people, and ensuring that when the time came, his name was the one at the top of the list. I felt my jaw tighten, a slow-burning fury rising inside me. I had given this company everything, and in return, they had given me nothing. I sat in silence for a long moment, my thoughts racing. I could argue. I could demand explanations. I could list every project I had led, every crisis I had solved, every extra hour I had put in while Mark had coasted. But I already knew how this would end. Nothing would change. Even if they humored me with a shallow apology or some half-hearted excuse, the truth was clear. I wasn't valued here. I never had been. I had wasted years of my life thinking that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the folder and set it down on the table. The room had gone silent, everyone waiting to see my reaction. I met Mark's gaze, and for the first time, I smiled. Not a forced smile, not a bitter one, just a small, knowing smile that made his smirk falter for a fraction of a second. Then, I pushed back my chair and stood up. No one spoke as I gathered my things. My hands were steady now, my movements calm. Lisa shifted in her seat. Are you leaving? I looked at her, then at Mr. Reynolds, then finally at Mark. Yes, I said simply. I am. Mark let out a small, amused scoff. You're quitting? Over this. I glanced at him, taking in his expression, the arrogance, the condescension, the absolute certainty that he had won. For now, maybe he had. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I turned away without another word, walking toward the door. Each step felt lighter, freer, as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had suddenly lifted. As I reached the door, I paused for a brief moment and glanced over my shoulder. Mark was still grinning, leaning back like he had nothing to worry about. I let my gaze sweep over the conference room one last time. These people, these so-called colleagues, had sat silently while I was discarded like yesterday's trash. None of them had spoken up. None of them had defended me. They had chosen their side. Fine. I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I walked out of the conference room, my footsteps echoing down the long hallway. The walls that once felt familiar now seemed cold and foreign, as if I were seeing them for the first time. My hands gripped the box I had grabbed from my desk, my belongings hastily packed inside. A few picture frames, some pens, notebooks filled with years of ideas and strategies. All just things now. Things I had once thought meant something here. The office buzzed with the usual background noise, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, muted conversations drifting between cubicles. But as I passed, I could feel the weight of the stairs. Some were quick, fleeting glances before turning back to their screens. Others lingered, hesitant, unsure whether they should say something or pretend they hadn't seen me at all. A few coworkers had the decency to look ashamed. Most didn't. I reached my desk, my nameplate still neatly displayed on the corner. I ran my fingers over it, tracing the letters of my own name as if trying to understand how, after all these years, I had become a ghost in this place. Hey. I turned to see Sarah, one of the few people I actually trusted here. She hovered near my desk, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her brows furrowed. Are you really leaving? She asked in a hushed voice. I let out a small, humorless chuckle. Looks that way. She glanced around, then stepped closer. I can't believe they did that to you. Everyone thought you were a lock for that promotion. Apparently, not everyone. Her jaw clenched. It's bullshit. Mark doesn't even. She exhaled sharply, lowering her voice. You carried him through half those projects. Everyone knows it. Everyone knowing it doesn't seem to change much, does it? I said, shoving a few more things into my box. She hesitated. Are you going to fight this? Go to HR? The higher-ups? I shook my head. HR was in that room, Sarah. They already made their decision. Her shoulders slumped, frustration evident on her face. She wanted to help, but she knew as well as I did that there was nothing to be done. The system was rigged. The game had already been played, and I wasn't even given a seat at the table. Sarah hesitated, then reached into her pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Take this, she said, slipping it into my box. I gave her a questioning look. It's my number. My personal number, she said quickly. I don't know what you're going to do next, but keep me in the loop, okay? I nodded, appreciating the gesture more than I could say. She opened her mouth as if to say something else, but then her gaze flickered over my shoulder, and her expression darkened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Wow. Mark's voice came from behind me, oozing faux sympathy. I didn't think you'd actually just quit. I inhaled slowly before turning. Mark stood there, arms crossed, watching me with that same smug grin he had worn in the meeting. He looked relaxed, almost amused, as if this was nothing more than some harmless joke between colleagues. I said nothing. What? No speech, he teased. No dramatic exit line? I tilted my head slightly, studying him. I had spent years working alongside this man, covering for his mistakes, fixing his sloppy work, making sure the projects we collaborated on didn't go down in flames. And for what? For him to laugh in my face. You know, he continued, leaning against the edge of my now former desk, you really should have been smarter about this. Networking, making the right connections, that's what gets you ahead. Not just working hard. I let out a small breath of laughter, shaking my head. You really think you're untouchable, don't you? Mark smirked. I mean, I'm standing here, and you're the one packing up your desk, so? I nodded slowly. You're right. That made him pause. His grin flickered slightly, as if he hadn't expected me to agree. But here's the thing, Mark, I said, keeping my voice calm. I've been doing your job for the past 2 years. HLL, I've been doing half the jobs in this department just to keep things from falling apart. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping just enough that only he could hear. Do you honestly think you can handle it on your own? For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty crossed his face. I smiled. Good luck, I said, picking up my box and turning away. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt lighter than I had in years. But beneath that calm exterior, something else was burning. Because this wasn't the end. Not even close. I stepped into the elevator and watched as the doors slid shut, sealing me off from the office. The place I had dedicated years of my life to. The place I had sacrificed so much for. And the place that had just tossed me aside without a second thought. I should have felt defeated. But I didn't. As the elevator descended, a slow, steady realization settled over me. I had been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that I had ignored the cracks in its foundation. This company had never valued me. They had used me, draining every ounce of effort and innovation I had to offer while rewarding people like Mark, the ones who played dirty and knew how to manipulate the system. I had been fighting the wrong battle. I wasn't going to beg for a place at a table that had already decided I wasn't welcome. I was going to build my own. The elevator dinged, and as the doors opened, I stepped out, not as someone who had just been betrayed, but as someone who was about to change the game. I took a few days to clear my mind, but my focus never wavered. While Mark was busy basking in his stolen victory, I was laying the groundwork for something much bigger. First, I reached out to my contacts, the clients I had worked with personally, the vendors who trusted me, the people who had seen firsthand the value I brought to the company. I wasn't reckless. I didn't openly poach them. Instead, I planted seeds. Casual conversations turned into subtle hints about their frustrations, and before long, it was clear that many of them were already dissatisfied with the company's recent direction. Then, I started connecting with former employees, people who had also been undervalued, overlooked, and pushed out by the same toxic leadership. I wasn't just looking for allies. I was building an army. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. With me gone, Mark struggled. Deadlines were missed. Clients grew frustrated. And with no one to cover for him, the mistakes he used to sweep under the rug were now on full display. But that was just the beginning. The documents I had gathered over the years, proof of unethical business practices, financial discrepancies, and HR's blatant favoritism, started making their way into the hands of the right people. A well-placed anonymous tip here, a forwarded email there. I didn't have to do much. The company's own greed and incompetence did the rest. Word spread. Clients started pulling their contracts. Investors began asking questions. Employees, tired of the toxic environment, started leaving in waves. And at the center of it all was Mark, flailing, watching as everything he thought he had secured slipped through his fingers. But the final blow? That was mine to deliver. 6 months after I walked out of that office, I found myself standing in the lobby of a new building, one that bore the name of my own company. A company built on integrity, innovation, and respect for its employees. And business was thriving. Many of the clients who had once worked with my former employer had eagerly jumped ship, seeking the kind of service and reliability they had once trusted me to provide. And as for Mark, well, fate had a way of balancing things out. One afternoon, as I was reviewing some reports, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Someone's here asking to see you," she said, hesitating slightly. "It's Mark." I leaned back in my chair, amusement flickering in my chest. "Send him in." Moments later, the man who had once stolen my promotion walked through my doors, not with the arrogance he had flaunted before, but with uncertainty written all over his face. He looked different. The sharp suit was gone, replaced with something far less polished. The cocky smirk was nowhere to be seen. He hesitated before speaking. I heard about what you're doing here." I nodded. "I'm sure you have." A long pause. Then, finally, he sighed. "I was wondering if you had any openings." I studied him, taking in the desperation beneath the forced confidence. Then I smiled. "Oops," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I forgot to tell you, we're not hiring." And with that, I watched as realization dawned in his eyes. This was the moment he finally understood. I didn't just walk away that day. I walked away with everything.